Today, there are over 1 billion vehicles on the road, according to the Discovery Channel, a world-renowned television channel, in 2015. This number is very surprising when just over 100 years ago, the Ford Model T became the first vehicle that your average consumer could afford.
Most of you use a vehicle every day as your main form of transportation.
The evolution of the automobile has greatly influenced our society.
Today we will be discussing the history of cars, sharing the laws and regulations relating to them, getting into the consumer interests of cars, and finally sharing the impact of cars on society. So first, let's get into the history of cars. Cars have improved greatly in their short history. Many cars were being made during the 1800s, however they weren't very good until the 1901 Mercedes was introduced. According to a History Channel article last updated in 2017, the 1901 Mercedes was introduced by Wilhelm Maybach and deserves credit for being the first car to meet all the essentials. It had a top speed of 53 miles per hour.
In 1908, the Ford Model T became the first vehicle that the average family could afford. People really liked the Model T because it was easy to drive and easy to repair. It was also very cheap, with a starting price of only $575, which was less than the average American salary at the time. 2 years later, in 1914, Ford introduced the assembly line. The assembly line reduced the time it took to create a Model T from 12 hours per vehicle to an hour and a half. It also created many jobs for Americans and helped Ford eventually produce 15 million Model Ts with a final price of only $290.
According to a 2013 Discovery Channel article, in 1940, General Motors released their first commercially available automatic transmission. This hydromatic drive system automatically shifted gears while you were driving the vehicle. Prior to the hydromatic system, the operator had to manually shift gears. This new idea was widely accepted because it made driving a vehicle much easier. Now, over 90% of all vehicles produced are installed with an automatic transmission.
The advancement of the automobile slowed in the 1940s. In 1942, the production of cars for the consumer market stopped. This is because gasoline and rubber were being rationed for World War II. During the war, less people drove cars, because the cars that were still on the road had to be maintained or repaired until new cars could be produced at the end of the war.
After the war ended, the demand for new cars dramatically increased. This increased demand caused many new innovations to be made in the new car market. According to Continental Tire, a well-known tire manufacturer stated in their 2017 article that the radial tire was introduced in 1948. The radial tire had metal wires that traveled perpendicular to the direction of travel. It was made out of metal wires, nylon, and polyester. The radial tire had many improvements such as improved braking, improved steering, and better longevity.
Another post-war innovation was fuel injection. Fuel injection atomizes the fuel so that it burns more efficiently. The first vehicle to offer this was a 1955 Mercedes 300 SL. Fuel injection helped it create more power and be more fuel efficient. It also made it much easier to start and easier to maintain than your traditional carburation system. Fuel injection didn't become standard until the 1980s.
The modern era brought many new technological advancements. According to Ben Stewart, who has been working for Popular Mechanics for 20 years, in his 2016 article, he had stated that the hybrid electric drivetrain revolutionized the automotive industry. The first mass-produced electric car was the 1998 Toyota Prius. It had one gas motor and one electric motor.
Another invention that has greatly influenced the modern car is the turbocharger. A turbocharger is a compressor that forces more air into the engine. With more air and gasoline, cars can make increased power. According to Ben Stewart, the first turbocharger was introduced in the 1960s. They did not become popular until 2008. In 2008, both Ford and General Motors added turbochargers to their economy cars. This gives the consumers the benefit of increased fuel economy and more power compared to a non-turbocharged car.
Now that we've shared the history of cars, it's time to move into the laws and regulations relating to cars. The laws and regulations are continuously changing. Before 1970, there was no laws regulating the safety equipment installed on cars. Then, in 1970, the National Highway and Traffic Safety Association was established by the Highway Safety Act. According to the NHTSA, an agency of the executive branch of the U.S. government, last updated in 2016, the NHTSA is responsible for implementing laws to help reduce the amount of injuries caused by accidents. They also introduced the 5-star rating program in 1993 that lets consumers easily know how safe a particular automobile is. It is based on a simple 5-star rating program.
Also, according to the NHTSA, one of the first regulated safety features was the seatbelt. The seatbelt was patented in 1885, however, it wasn't available to American consumers at all until 1950. There were no laws regarding seatbelts until 1984, when New York became the very first state to require all passengers to wear seatbelts. All 50 states followed within the decade.
Also from the NHTSA, airbags were a crucial component in making automobiles safer. The first airbag was invented in 1951, and the purpose of it was to inflate in case of a car accident to protect the driver and or passengers. According to Ben Clark, who is an editor-in-chief of E-Mercedes-Benz, a magazine dedicated to covering Mercedes-Benz, in February of 2012. The first manufacturer to install airbags was Mercedes in 1981. Since Mercedes started manufacturing airbags, they've been used more and more. Now, dual front impact airbags are required in all vehicles from the model year of 1999 and up.
The NHTSA also stated that electronic stability control, ESC, and tire pressure monitoring systems, TPMS, help save lives. Electronic stability control works by applying the brakes to individual wheels when the driver begins to lose control. The NHTSA stated that electronic stability control saved over 2,200 lives between 2008 and 2010. Tire pressure monitoring systems also help let the driver know if their tires are dangerously low. Both of these systems have been required in all cars since 2007.
According to Arthur Van Bentham, who has a PhD in business economics, in an article in Science Direct in April of 2015, speed limit laws have not always been what they are today. In 1973, the national maximum speed limit was set at 55 miles per hour after the oil crisis of 1973. It was thought at the time it would reduce oil consumption in the United States by about 2.2%. However, it was later discovered it only reduced it by about 0.2 to 1%, prompting the change to 65 miles per hour in 1987. In 1995, the national speed limit was completely done away with, returning speed limit creation back to the states. Some states, such as Texas, have speed limits as high as 85 miles per hour today.
Now that you know about the laws and regulations, we'll be moving into the changing of consumers' car preferences. Americans are continually changing their car preferences. However, they usually prefer larger vehicles. There were two periods when Americans didn't prefer large vehicles, which caused financial turmoil. According to Jeff Green, a graduate from Michigan State, in his article on Bloomberg in July of 2013. The first of these periods was during the oil crisis of the 1970s. The oil crisis changed consumer interests from the gas guzzlers to the more fuel-efficient cars created from the Japanese and German automakers. The lack of demand for the gas guzzlers caused American automakers to put large price cuts on their gas guzzlers in order to sell them. The second period was during the Great Recession of 2009, when fuel prices skyrocketed. This caused Americans to want more fuel-efficient vehicles, and automakers responded by focusing on more fuel-efficient hybrid and electric vehicles.
There was a resurgence of larger vehicles due to the decrease in fuel prices. According to David Phillips, who is an editor for Automotive News, in an article published in January of 2016, in 2015, large vehicles, mid-size vans, and luxury SUVs had increased in sales by roughly 30%. 5 of the top 10 best-selling vehicles in America were trucks in 2015.
Styling preferences have varied greatly throughout the years. Cars from the turn of the century to the 1930s resembled horse-drawn carriages, because this is what consumers were used to. Ford Model T followed this same design language to create a car that appealed to everyday Americans. This is according to an article on the Ford Motor Company website from 2015. In the 1920s, the enclosed cab was invented. This began the shift away from horseless carriage-style cars.
The 1930s and 40s saw automakers began focus on power and styling instead of primarily just on function. They began to produce sleek cars with the headlights and fenders integrated seamlessly into the body. In 1932, Ford introduced the Ford V8, which was an instant success and cultivated the love of the V8 engine into American consumers. During this time, V12 and V16 engines were also produced.
This time started to shape the car culture in America. In the 50s, consumers wanted more vibrant cars than the dull ones that had been produced pre-World War II. According to Robert Van Dien, a former president of the Canadian National Railway, in his book titled Car Culture During the 1950s, published in 1957. Because of this demand, automakers began to produce more extravagant cars with vibrant paint inside and out. This time also marked the beginning of the use of cars for recreation, such as driving movie theaters.
The 1960s and early 70s saw Americans become more interested in boxy muscle-style cars. Gas prices were so cheap, which caused Americans to want powerful gas-guzzling vehicles. American auto manufacturers began producing smaller cars, primarily to compete with the imported Volkswagen Beetle. Gas prices in the 1960s were so cheap at only 31 cents per gallon, it allowed the Americans to be able to obtain high-performance vehicles.
Higher gas prices in the 70s and 80s caused consumer preferences to shift to more fuel-efficient vehicles. During this time, Americans began to buy cars from European and Japanese automakers. They also began to buy diesel cars, because at this time, diesel was significantly cheaper than gasoline.
The 1990s brought about consumer preferences that are still somewhat present today. Consumers began to like bubble-shaped cars instead of the boxy cars of the 1980s. They also began to focus on the technology implemented into the cars rather than the power or the styling of the car. During this time, GPS and infotainment systems became the pinnacle of the car market.
Now that you know about the changing of consumer car preferences, we'll move into the impacts of cars on society. Vehicles have played a large impact on society. One of these problems is overcrowding. According to James D. Schwartz, a professor at Columbia University, in his article on Urban County in 2017, he stated that there are 812 vehicles for every 1,000 men, women, and children in America. Similarly, in Beijing, a large city where vehicles are much less needed, there are 5 million vehicles in a city of 20 million people.
According to Alan Rosen, who is an author for the Brooklyner from July 8, 2013, there were 800,000 newly registered cars in Beijing as well. There are many causes to increase traffic congestion. Road closure, roadwork, double parking, lane closure due to utility problems, or even an accident could all be probable causes to increase traffic congestion. The Department of Transportation could also be equally responsible for purposely changing the stoplight timing. We have all experienced this at one point or another, and there's nothing more frustrating than driving 20 minutes just to go 2 to 3 miles due to poorly timed stop signals.
Cars have significantly increased air pollution. According to an article from the Health and Science Journal on the Points of View Reference Center in June 2012, humans are the main source of pollution. Automobiles contribute significantly to air pollution.
All of these toxins are released into the air, which causes smog, a visible result of air pollution. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, a nonprofit advocacy organization in the United States from 2013, transportation is accountable for about half of all carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides released into the air, and accountable for about a quarter of all hydrocarbons released into the air.
All of this pollution has caused very unhealthy conditions. Roughly 1/2 of Americans, or about 150 million people, live in an area where air quality is not up to the federal air quality standards. This poor air quality increases your chances for respiratory conditions, such as bronchitis or asthma, and even more life-threatening conditions such as cancer. Particle pollution is single-handedly responsible for up to 30,000 premature deaths each year.
The automobile has revolutionized the development of cities. According to Ben Elgaze, who was a longtime software engineer at IBM, reported to Extreme Tech on March 18, 2016, that the automobile has industrialized how cities are made. We now have suburbs and exurbs that go around the city so people can live far away from their places of work and recreation.
According to Brian McKenzie, a sociologist at the United States Census Bureau, in a study from August of 2013, he found that for most Americans, the main way to get to work is the car. In 2013, 86% of people said that they either drove themselves to work or carpooled to work. The city that has the lowest amount of people that drive to work is New York City. Only 56.9% of the people use a car to get to work. Since the 1980s, the rate of carpooling has declined, and the rate of driving alone has increased until 2010.
So in conclusion, today we have told you about the history of cars. We've shared the laws and regulations relating to them, the changing consumer interests of cars, and the impact of cars on society. The evolution of the automobile has greatly influenced our society. The car has changed drastically from the first car on the road to the billionth car on the road today.